Greetings, everyone! Good morning to you! Hello, hello! How's everyone doing today? Welcome! It's time for Talking Tabletop. We're going to be going and diving into a tabletop topic, and honestly, I don't need these headphones on, so we'll need them if we need them. I was just checking something before we started. I hope everybody's having a great day. Hey, let me know, not only if you're joining us live here on Twitch, but if you're joining in the YouTube comments, let me know how your day is going. And also, honestly, we're going to be talking about Shadowrun archetypes today. Let me know either what your favorite archetype or an archetype you really want to play is. I'm curious as to what people might want to do, especially towards the end when we're going to be finishing up talking about all these archetypes. So what I've done is I have, honestly, every PDF of a Shadowrun book from 1st edition to 6th edition, including the 20th anniversary, which has its own, 5.5 edition or something. We're going to be going through all the archetypes in all of these books. And there will be some repeats in them, and I will talk about how the repeats evolve over time for these archetypes and how they change, but also I'm going to talk about what it means to play one of these archetypes as we go. So I'm going to be stopping by at a lot of places as we're kind of running through effectively versions of characters you can play in Shadowrun. That's the object of today, because Shadowrun is a freeform system. You can build whatever you want, but the object of these archetypes or sample characters is to give you ideas of what to play and different routes to play under. So why don't we get started? I'm going to throw myself up over to our corner over there to start out with and throw out the first book we have here. Throw it up to here. We'll have to alter it. And here are the first archetype from Shadowrun 1st edition. So what do we start out with Shadowrun in 1st edition? We start with the Burnt Out Mage. It's a really interesting place to start out with, because this is a character, what we're showing here off in Shadowrun 1st edition, that is very different than a lot of characters. Especially more in the modern Shadowrun, you will find that there is a heavy discouragement from using cyberware in conjunction with any sort of magic. And yes, it has a huge disadvantage. If your essence is lower, you get less magic. In those early editions, you'd start at 6 magic. You wouldn't have to stat it up to anything higher like you do now in the modern ones. So the essence lost was a lot easier to handle. Even so, nowadays, you could build a character like this. These archetypes in the early days give kind of like a couple of sentences that are supposed to be in the characters' voices, followed up by like a kind of commentary track, as you can see here. The idea of a burnt-out mage is you were reliant too much on magic for a long period of time, things happened, and so you changed your idea to rely a lot on technological enhancements, cyberware and stuff like that. This is a little before the BioWare time, so this is very cyberware heavy. And as you can see, the person's got an essence of 1.4. The stats and the abilities look a lot the same. They will always look a lot the same. There are things that have changed, certainly in the way all of these things roll, and especially the dice rolls, but the stats look the same. So it's an interesting concept for a character, as you're one that still delved into the magic, but you had this change that you dealt into technology then. It's modern day hard character to balance. Certainly you could be someone that gives up a few essence, a few points of magic, in order to get some kind of big boost, especially if you're straight up a spellcaster. It might hurt you, but if I invest into that 6, so I can also invest into, let's say, 2 essence worth of cyberware that might be key to a lot of things I have, I could build a very interesting character. Dropping it down all that way, so it's a 1, and you barely can cast spells, just enough. That actually might not be bad either, depending on your spell selection. If I'm not going for boom, flash, I make you explode spells, and I'm going for things that enhance me, or perhaps things that are utility spells, well, honestly, utility mage that relies on a lot of cyberware could exist. 5 points of essence in cyberware, and you have that 1 left magic that you use to cast a whole bunch of utility spells that you enhance then your continued afterwards. Might be an interesting build modernly, but it'd be difficult. But that's your idea of the burnt out mage, combining a lot of cyberware and magic in an interesting way. The Decker. This is the first time we're going to be introduced to the Decker. And they use the word technomancer already when it's not as true. Remember, early Shadowrun, 80s. So, your keyboard was your computer in the early 80s. We've certainly changed the way that we look on things now. But again, it was, they do kind of state it's an alternate technological thing that switches in the 90s. And certainly in the 90s, we weren't looking at these type of things very much so. So the idea that in the 90s when things go to tits, the idea of developing a cell phone the way we have it doesn't come about for decades longer because all the shit going down, and we go to keyboard. Because again, the keyboard that they're using here is much more advanced than our computers and cell phones now, by leagues. It is a virtual reality machine and a thing of insanity when it comes to how its capabilities in comparison to modern day computers, and certainly can get a bit better ones. Still, it is a little bit of a clunkiness in appearance from the 80s left over, and a idea of how things would develop. But this is our hacker, our person that breaks into cyber systems, goes into the matrix, affects it, breaks down security and that kind of stuff. This is our first view into the hacker character, which we will see a lot. I think every edition is going to have this one, so we will visit the Decker and talk about it more. Again, very similar to the last one and how they present it here, but we'll move on because we're going to be talking about it again. The Detective. There's another one that we will revisit, I know for a fact. It's supposed to be someone that's an investigator. This is our first character that's not relying on cyberware, not relying on magic. We're relying on skills. This is our first skilled character. And this is the idea that, for a detective, you're an investigator. This is adding a little bit of the noir to your cyber fantasy world, which is not necessarily a bad thing. You could be, because of the nature of contacts and stuff, you could be a person that just doesn't rely on cyberware, doesn't rely on magic, doesn't rely on a lot of equipment, but relies on a lot of built skills to do investigations and figure out things. You might need those investigations to discover not only information for a job might be scarce. You might need someone like a detective to find that information out. Or the suggestion that has been given to you by your fixer for your job might not sound all that appealing. You might want to dive into things and investigate alternate ways to go about things, which could be helpful for it. So this is kind of like on the investigatory, discovery, probably a little bit of charisma kind of character. This is first edition we're hitting up right now. We're going to go through all 7 versions of them. So detective character is a very interesting one to look at as an archetype. It's one where you're reliant on your skills, but you're not really reliant on combat skills per se. You're more reliant on the in-between skills that a lot of characters do require, but you're a specialist in them. You're a specialist in the, etiquette, in the discovery, a little bit of computer search that you don't need the cyberware, that you just have like a decker, like a some kind of thing to get into. Still has a high firearms, so you're still good for a fight, but also look at this: negotiation, survival, stealth, biotech, car, a lot of skills which are these very detective version. Elven Decker. In these early editions, they came up with a couple of archetypes, and the thing is, because they wanted to show off some of the metatypes, this is basically a Decker, but an elf. That's it. That's all there is to it. Nothing really special, different. Again, we're talking 80s when this originally came out, and they wanted to show off the differences between, the different metatypes a lot of times. So in this early one, they put a different one here. They don't do this a lot, but they do this a couple of times here where they show off a lot of metahuman types randomly. They do it a lot more organically in later editions, but here it was, we're comparing this honestly to something like the D&D editions that were out in the 80s, where earlier editions, you'd play, instead of a class, you'd play elf, or dwarf was your class. It's also your species, but it's also your class. So think about that. We're coming off the backs of that time period when we're getting into this. So, yeah. But it's basically a decker that's an elf. So we're not going to delve too much about that. Here's an interesting one. Former company man. Effectively, you are a person that, in general, a little equipment, a little cyberware, a little skills, a little things, but the idea for this one is your background more than anything. And that's why some of these archetypes are a lot more interesting early on, because they reflected a little bit more of background to where you came from, not just your skill set. This one is someone that worked for a megacorp and you got out for whatever reason, or you quit, or, you know, something happened that your past has to kind of be buried and you're out of there, and now you're kind of working in the shadows. So there could be very interesting stories for that, because you would have worked with a big mega corporation, and you might still have contacts, honestly, within that corporation that you used to. That could lead for very interesting character development, but again, this is a much more heavy background type archetype. And again, you can see these in the earlier editions, that these kind of archetypes are eventually phased out for more modern ones. But it does give you an idea of a type of character you could play. And I think that's the idea, is it's not only statistics or a kind of direction for your abilities, it's also, in essence, a little background for your characters. Former wage mage. Spellcaster. They say it in certain ways because it sounds a lot more like the company man, the former company man, that you were like working for like maybe freelance for a lot of companies and stuff, or doing a lot of jobs that you were like doing, employed as a mage in various places. But now you're kind of a little bit more freeform, a little bit more on your own, and you're going about and doing, you know, magic for yourself and for Shadowrunning. It's another idea that this is taking a bit of the archetype of a mage archetype. You're not using any... This is the one that doesn't use any cyberware, unlike the burnt-out mage, and combining it with a little of the background stuff, which, again, these early archetypes did a lot of times. So it does give you the idea of some of the ways you could background, but it also gives you a build of a, honestly, mage. And this is a mage that would use... it combines all the different types of magic in the early editions, which I'm going to tell you I'm very rusty at my first edition magic, but when I can see on here, there's fighter, healer, and prowler type spells. Oh my, they've changed things a lot when it comes to spellcasting, for the better. If I was to pick up first edition Shadowrun, it would be a little bit difficult for me to play for a bit, because I'd have to re-remember all the different rules. Have played it before, but not for years. Again, so, Haunted Past, you've moved on to become a Shadowrunner to escape it. You're just a mage. Pretty simplistic idea there. You wield magic, you have a magic attribute, you have magic skills, you have magic spells you cast, and have some equipment to supplement it, because you don't want to use any cyberware, because you're the purest mage. Gang member. This is one that, honestly, we will also revisit, that does have a little bit of a background, like the detective, but this one also does give you an idea of a skill selection, which I think is the good thing with this one. The corpora worker and the former wage mage, both of those give background ideas, but they're vague background ideas. What kind of corporation did you work for? What did you do in that corporation? Those determine your skills and are questions you answer yourself. If I'm saying I'm a detective, or I'm a gang member, even a former gang member, that kind of tells me the kind of skills I'm going to select here. You just look at here, this is a very combat heavy, and a very up close and personal combat heavy. Light cyberware, uses a lot of like random equipment and stuff too. This is kind of like the not super financed on the streets kind of character, I would think. You've got a lot of like combat. You grew up in a very difficult situation, probably. You are honestly part of a gang. Remember, sci fantasy kind of apocalyptic, kind of dystopian kind of world. There's a lot of gang members. So, being part of a gang or former member of a gang and maybe having connections to it would be interesting. And again, the idea of the skills I would have learned in that gang can apply to Shadowrunning, and it would be a good basis to kind of think of skills that I might take. There are some overlap with something like a detective, but as there are more skills now than there were, this idea, again, still is relevant, that you could use it as a combination of looking at what kind of skills and attributes I have, but also, you know, a background, too. So that's the good thing about some of these early archetypes and how they've developed, too, is the better ones that have remained are the ones that have that dual order of, here is my background, but here's also an idea of the kind of skills and attributes and kind of things I would take for a character to be that character, to be that former gang member. What helped me be a member of that gang? What helped me be a detective? A merc. Here's one that's a little bit more open-ended because, again, we're going full military now. Yes, take a billion combat skills, maybe take some cyberware, have a lot of gear. Yes, these type of characters do become Shadowrunners. You worked as a mercenary, probably with a mercenary company, whether corporate or private. You worked somewhere in a war, probably. There are plenty of those that happen across the Shadowrun world over the years, and once retiring from your mercenary unit, you went into Shadowrunning, which is a kind of weird direction because I guess it's less deadly? You know, again, this is one of those ones that I can understand why it disappears from the spectrum of archetypes, but I do understand why it was there. Because especially during the time period we're talking about, which was more of like 2030s, 2040s, it was a lot more tumultuous than it is now towards the 2070s, 2080s, in the more modern versions of Shadowrun. Because the time period have gone forward, some stability has arrived. There is still a lot of issues going on in the world, but the sheer fact that it has been decades of this shit, that people got used to it, stability kind of occurred. Shit still happens, but we're more stable than we were. It's, you know, that happens. You get more stable. Shit goes down. As it gets better, things get more stable. Again, another reason why there are probably less mercs out there in the first place to become Shadowrunners. Again, this is one of those ones that feels like there's a lot of different directions. I'm good at shooting stuff. Cool. Like, at least the detective and the gang member who have combat skills feel like they're going to have some non-combat skills too. Merc, I mean, when I say merc, I'm not saying anything non-combat for that. I'm just saying, here's a bunch of combat skills. So, it's another one I'm fine with kind of disappearing, but I can understand its use and we can kind of talk about it here. Orc mercenary. You're a mercenary, but you're an orc. I mean, again, same kind of thing. It's an unfortunate thing that this one makes sense a lot of ways in comparison to a lot of backstories for stuff. As much as all the meta types have been mistreated, orcs have had the short end of the stick the most. It just has kind of happened over all the years for them, unfortunately. They're the closest to human in terms of physical abilities, the least likable. Like, elves get away with being kind of pretty and kind of being the first ones. Same with dwarfs. They're close enough to humans. Trolls get away with it because they're big and mean. Orcs don't. And so, honestly, being an orc mercenary made sense that, especially, again, tumultuous, very battle-ready time period, orcs have it better off. Again, modern-day Shadowrun, aka the time period Shadowrun is in now, and the dates that it's in now, in comparison to this. If we historically look at it, you see my history thing, the time period First Edition took place in, terrible for a lot of people. A lot less people had a lot less rights. A lot more terrible things were happening. And honestly, being just driven to become a mercenary as an orc is understandable, unfortunately. So, it is just a mercenary. But it's one that has a lot more story to it, I think, too, because of the time period. Less now. A rigger. Hey, our first rigger, which has some connections and some similarities to our good old friend, the Decker, which we've already gone by here. They have always been and always will be, click into a vehicle, control it. Nowadays, we also have the drones that have kind of come about, but again, it's another entire thing that we can see as a delayed part of technology in a world that went dystopian much faster than us and went through a lot more shit and went through like a magic semi-apocalypse that kind of came about. The world of Shadowrun, as an alternate history, went through a lot of shit. It took them a lot longer to get to their drone technology that we have now and like it. You know, they could have had drones. They just could have been really, maybe our level of drones, which aren't really great for something like a rigger. Vehicles, on the other hand, much more technologically advanced. So that's kind of the idea. This point in time, you click into a vehicle, you can control the vehicle with your mind. Riggers, they're okay to play, but unfortunately, it's the thing that you're a getaway driver in these early editions, a glorified getaway driver. So, you know, it was a lot less useful early editions. It required oftentimes being both a rigger and a decker sometimes to be useful in the early ones. Yeah, when magic can do things like scrying, you do not need drones. It's very reasonable. Again, late 90s into early 2000s, technology went differently because history went differently. And a lot of things went differently. Just certain inventions or certain developments were put on the back burner. Anyway, so Rigger is one that we will revisit again, as I've been talking about revisits. And, you know, we can enjoy understanding this is their first incarnation, that they are an original first edition idealism of someone that controls a vehicle or drone through their brain hookup with technology in their head, that they become one with it. Here's another interesting one, a rocker. Oh boy, I really think that this is in here because of the similar influence that both Cyberpunk and Shadowrun had to each other. You know, I really think that there was influences between each other. I'm unsure which came out first of the original of those two of them, but there was a lot of influence. And also, you have to think this is 80s cyberpunk. So the idea of a rock star character that also does some side jobs for the adrenaline rush on the side. So it's like by day musician, by night Shadowrunner kind of thing. Or I guess by, you know, early night rock star, late night Shadowrunner, that kind of thing. You know, it's also an idea that, like, you know, you're maybe not super great as a musician. You're not the top rock star. You're like the person that can maybe get a job at a bar kind of thing pretty easily, but you're not going to, like, you know, book a huge theater and fill it. It's interesting for a character idea. It doesn't really scream anything that I really want to play for skills for a Shadowrunner, honestly. That as a rock star, these skills would be great, or a rocker, these skills would be great for a, you know, character. But, you know, again, this is another one of those ones I would call a background archetype for these early editions. It's interesting. The idea of being like a musician in the time period and also a Shadowrunner is a fine one. You could do in modern day versions of Shadowrun in 5th or 6th edition. I don't think it's, you know, really needed for understanding anything about the type of abilities you take. Honestly, you could be a rockstar street samurai, a rockstar, you know, mage, or anything like that. Yeah, concept more than archetype. Definitely. So. Shaman! They did separate these, and they are a separation between magics, and it is a lot more developed nowadays, but the idea is that in the early day, there were really two types of magic. Nowadays, there are more types. It's basically the idea of the direction you come about magic from. In early days, it was hermetic magic or schematic magic. Basically, if you're a mage, you're studying magic that is very similar to the Western idealism of magic. And you're coming up with magic that might be very medieval idealism of it. Basically, you saw some people play D&D, because D&D could exist in this world, honestly, and you're like, that's the type of magic I'm going to learn. That was Hermetic. Shamanic are basically, hey, remember the Native Americans got magic back first because they had a better connection with the magical world? And yes, this is very culturally insensitive, you can say, but I'm going to tell you, this character is probably Native American. Because, remember the history of Shadowrun, as much as we would like to say this is culturally insensitive. The thing is, it's this weird juxtaposition that the Native Americans won a war versus the U.S. with magic. They did. And they awakened shamanic magic. So, is this person Native American or just learned from some people that were Native Americans? I don't know. But the idea that, like, they do it less now. Shamans look a lot better nowadays. But I think it's supposed to be reflecting on very early on that there is a very heavy Native American influence to shamanic magic. So, yes, we look at this now and we say, yeah, it's kind of culturally insensitive. It really is. But we can look at where it came from and understand why it is. And those are important factors, because we will see shamans again. They will look a lot better. Because it turns out people are people, and they don't want to dress like, they might want to have some connections to their ancestors, but they don't want to always dress like them, too. I don't dress in lederhosen because I'm from Germany. Do I respect things of culture from Germany? Because most of my blood is German. Yes. Would, in the right circumstance, I dress in something like that? I'm sure, like if there was a reason behind it. Would I do it for a job? You'd have to pay me a lot. Would I do it for, I know a skill based upon that? Honestly, no. If I knew how to yodel, I'd just yodel. Which I actually think is also more Austrian too, but my ancestors are from Bavaria. It's that all Alpsy region there. Southern Bavaria too. There's mountains there. I have visited one of my ancestral homes on my grandmother's side. Side story briefly, but yes, pretty insensitive here, but we can understand why, which is important here because we will revisit the shaman character. Street mage! Hey, we got one more mage for you. Rather than being a mage that was employed by people, you just did magic anywhere, It's basically like the former wage mage, though now you grew up on the streets, I guess? I don't know. This is another one that's very backgroundy or concept-y rather than archetype-y. Because, again, both the mages can kind of just be thrown together. They're mages. This here, it's a thing. So, I'll have to note that, I'll have to remember that culturally insensitive thing to put a little bit of warning there. It's there. It's some insensitivity. It's not, we're looking at something in a very educational manner. But I have to remember to mark this video when I put it up on YouTube about it. I should, because that's a good YouTube person. But yeah, street mage here, it's another mage. Okay, I'm a mage that maybe knows some street skills. Great, I grew up on the streets. What does that mean other than magic? I don't know, maybe some combat skills. They got some stealth on here. I can shoot a gun. It's just, again, it's combining a little bit of an actual, archetype with a concept and calling it a new archetype. It's not a lot, and it's first edition for you. Street Samurai! Hey, this is a big one because it's a traditional one, and I honestly, you have to remember, again, Samurai, not insensitive, one of the nations that kind of won the global war of everything was Japan. Japan's megacorps survived a lot of crap and became megacorps. Turns out they were in good position to take advantage of a lot of things. Remember, the main source of money is the new yen, which comes from Japan. Japan won a lot of the world. There are local currencies, but the international currency isn't the dollar, it's the new yen. Anywhere you can go, you can probably spend a new yen. There aren't really physical money anywhere anyway, but there's, it's all cred sticks and electronics. Nonetheless, you don't really get physical money. But yes, other people do have money too, but no one ever talks about it because New Yen won. So it's like, the idea of a street samurai comes from that idea, probably from some original idealism, hopefully coming from Japan, but who knows? Maybe someone really kind of insensitive or racist came up with the original moniker of street samurai. I don't know. This is combining cyberware. You get a lot of, stereotyping happens, cultural appropriation happens, that kind of thing. Yeah. It's combining, you get a lot of cyberware, and then you have a combination of both some melee and some firearm skills, and you dive out onto the street. A street samurai is, in essence, a built Shadowrunner. When you are building a street samurai, you're building a Shadowrunner, but you're not building like your average one. You're building the combat person. You are the tank of a Shadowrunning group. You are the tank of illegal operations. You are very freelance as a street samurai. That could be the reason that you got this way. Be a freelance fighter in wherever town you come from. Dealing with things where if you need to be hired on by a bodyguard, by a mob boss, or, a gang needs some more muscle, or, there's someone in the police needs something taken care of. Something that you're doing jobs which are kind of Shadowrun jobs, but not quite Shadowrun jobs, and it develops into Shadowrunning, and that's why you've cybered yourself out, and you got your both types of combat skills. That's the idea that, yeah, I can use a gun, but I'm going to have some kind of melee skill too. That's the idea that you are a warrior through and through. And honestly, the modern day street samurai does kind of have an idea of like a code, but it's not like the same kind of code as like you'd say for actual samurai. It's more like, you do your job and you stay to your job kind of thing. It's the general like, you are muscle of the underworld. You are muscle of the Shadowrunning world. That is your job. You stick to it kind of thing. And again, individuals vary. But, a street samurai with a good reputation, as a truck goes by on my street and I shouldn't, a good reputation is that you will do your job and be kind of loyal to that job and kind of things like that. So there is an idea that could come down from the idealisms of samurai, but it kind of comes down to the warriorism of it all. And again, very heavy Japanese influence throughout the world, because, like, I think 3 out of all the mega corporations in the world are Japanese or something, 2 or 3, plus, the New Yen one. And one of the oldest actually 2 of the oldest mega corporations are Japanese. And granted, that doesn't mean there isn't some European and stuff influence. There are, and some American companies out there too. There are. It's just that, you have to understand where global influence came from and some of the countries that did the best. Japan did one of the best. They did go a little bit more imperial there for a number of years. They've gotten better. But they did bring back a little bit World War II. Not as bad as World War II. Just barely. Just barely. World War II has some very terrible things. You look it up historically. I'm just saying, there was a lot of bad things that happened in the Shadowrun world. A lot of bad things. And no country is against that, including the United Canadian American States, basically what's left of US and Canada, after everything went to shit. Where I live in Pennsylvania is a member of them. So if I wanted to figure out where I would live in the Shadowrun world in the future, I'm a United Canadian American States citizen. So you can kind of figure that out. But that is Street Samurai. And then we have a Street Shaman. So, here's where we get the differentiation, and it comes down to backstory and concept more. Your Shaman character is probably descended from the Native American nations, because there are a whole bunch of them that own a lot of territory and have control of people that have Native American blood in them. It apparently is, a lot more important for those people that can track it. My good friend Joe, who has a good percentage of it in his body, not a huge percentage, but because of his father has some Native American blood, could have joined the Native American nations probably. He can track it. He could have been living in that area where shamanism and a lot of the old culture is brought back in combination with modern culture. On the other end, we have the Street Samurai shaman here, which is someone that learns that type of magic, but lives in a city, in the streets. You're not diving into the culture behind the magic. You have to look at the different types of mages, too. Mages, honestly, you get people that dress like stereotypical wizards, or whatever cultural type of magic you have. There are people that dress up like that. There are shamans that dress like traditional Native American shamans, like the one we saw. Is that the type of character you're going to play? Honestly, a traditionalist? If you want to be from the Native American nations and dress like that, sure. If you just want to be a shaman and be like a person that learned that type of magic because you were good at it, yeah. Again, shamans were always more about spirits. Hermetic mages were more about spells. Both of them could do both of them. That's one of those things that's always kind of existed. I think in this, this is definitely a little bit more on that end that, it's more pronounced in these earlier editions, but that's how it is now, is either you're better at spell casting or conjuring, and there's also some ones that are better at some of the astral stuff too, for some of the belief things. And if you really want to learn about some of the other belief systems that do exist out there, which are more minor, rather than shamanic and hermetic, there are books that have been released in 4th, 5th edition, and 6th edition showing them off. But the idealism is two big thoughts in magic existed. One, shamanic, because of the Native American nations and winning a magic war against the U.S., and two, hermetic, because outside of those people, the people that learned magic were basically a combination of people on the east coast of the U.S. and Europe, and they looked at magic like, guess what? European style of it, wizards, King Arthur, Merlin, that kind of shit. So anyway, Street Shaman, there we go. You are a shaman, you're on the streets, probably don't have as much, connections to it, no cyberware. It's, again, just a shaman, but a background. Here we go for a big one. This one, again, comes down to the Native American nations. This one is probably the worst of the aged ones that have aged badly, but it falls under the line of not only do we have a little bit of insensitivity here nowadays for various reasons, the idea is you're from the Native American lands. It does talk about the Great Ghost Dance. The thing is, this is a character that during this time period would have been around for the Great Ghost Dance, when massive super spells were cast by the Native American nations. So you are a member of that. You are a member of one of the Native American nations. You might live up to some of the old Native American ways because of the superiority of, honestly, this is the kind of thing you have to think about. If a culture discovered magic, and your magic was connected to your spiritualism and your ancient beliefs, certainly your ancient beliefs would become more popular. Let's talk about the Scandinavian countries. If people that practiced the Viking ways discovered magic by looking to, honestly, worshipping the Viking deities, the Norse deities, you don't think a lot more Scandinavian people would go a little bit more Viking. It would probably happen because of magic. It would be weird. It's weird here. You're from the Native American nations. Another one of those ones that I feel like is just, it's a background. I'm from the Native American nations. Okay. And that's our archetypes here, at least for 1st edition. So we'll take a second here to move on to the next one. But yeah, so certainly, late 80s, had a lot of things to it that, you know, had some effects. Let's look at the second edition ones, though. Because now, it's been a few years. We're looking a little better. We fixed some of the system. Shadowrun 2nd Edition, still kind of awful because it's still based upon the original edition's systems, just a little bit more refined. Not quite a 1.5. It is definitely 2nd Edition that they've upgraded enough rules for it, but the rules feel very similar in the way they go about it. We haven't had major upgrades to the way that the game system is run. It's pretty similar. Bodyguard. So this is another one that I'm going to call is actually probably half decent as a background type concept / archetype. You're a bodyguard. Bodyguards are going to have a certain number of skills. Again, quotes and concepts are here. Is it any better than some of the other ones? Something like the detective or the gang member feels better when it comes into going into Shadowrunning, and the idea of it as you are basically a contracted criminal. That's what Shadowruns are. Shadowrunners are contracted criminals. You go through means, and you don't just do criminal jobs. You get hired on by legitimate things, like governments, corporations, you know, legitimate things hire you to do crimes, basically. Or to do things that are at the edge of the law. Especially because you remember, corporations have their own, are basically their own nations onto themselves. So when you want to go steal something from another nation, you don't do it yourself, that's a war. You send Shadowrunners in. They're expendable. So a bodyguard Shadowrunner, neat. Sure, you got some skills which could be helpful. But again, it's just... It's better than some of the other ones, I feel like, but it's still not great for when it comes to these archetypes. If you want to play a bodyguard, cool. That might be a good reason that you got into a lot of the skills that you can use when maybe something went wrong with someone you were protecting, and so you had to kind of like retire from that because you couldn't get hired on. And now you have to kind of just be a Shadowrunner. There's good reasons for it. Combat Mage! Finally, we're getting away from weirdness of mages. We're revisiting the mage. Now you're a mage that honestly has a little bit of cyberware. They only do cyber eyes, so they do have a little bit of reduction on their essence and therefore a reduction on magic. The idea in this one is that they are, you know, an elite group of battle mages. Kind of like you've been taught that you're both magical and fighting machine. Whether or not that's your study of magic, the way that you went about it, or the fact is you went through some stuff in your background, that you went through a lot of combat and stuff and learned combat skills, it means that you're able to mix, you know, gunfire and magic casting, and you have the equipment to match it. This is a very traditional type of mage to use. One that can fight, because honestly, sometimes spells aren't the best idea. Maybe there's magical defenses. Or maybe if you cast a spell, it'll burn you out, because spell casting is infinite, but has a backlash that you have to worry about. It's called drain. It's always been there. Yes, I can cast spells at will. I have to worry about my drain. And the more magic, the more powerful magic I use, the more possibility of drain occurs. It's a die roll every time. It's basically, you've got to soak some damage every time. If you soak it all, great! You can keep casting spells. If you don't, you're taking stun damage. So the combat mage, learn to pick up a gun. It's traditional. So this is a very like big archetype that we're going to revisit here a bunch. Hey, our Decker friend again. They're back. And it's the exact same image too. We've got the exact same image, probably a lot of the exact same stuff, maybe some similar stats to it too. Not a big changes here in our mage at all. But it's basically the same thing. Sorry, just adjusting my chair here a little bit. And we've talked about it. We don't have any major upgrades to this type of character by this edition. Because again, we're only a few years out when the second edition of Shadowrun came out. So it's sort of like we've adapted and fixed some things up, but we haven't come up with any major things now. So we're kind of skim over this version of the Decker here because it's pretty much the same. Detective. Again, since we're very similar at this point in time, we haven't had any major upgrades in the way that they're presented and stuff like this. We don't really have to dive into it for 2nd edition here. We can kind of step over it because we're here, we've seen it. It's the same kind of thing. Dwarf Mercenary. Remember, we've had other mercenaries before. Hey, now we have a Dwarven Mercenary. Again, this is a way to show off this is what a dwarf kind of would be like. And it is very like, we're trying to show off the metatypes without trying to show off the metatypes is the one that happens in the future. Now we have to show off the metatypes so you know they exist kind of thing. So welcome to the Dwarf Mercenary. It is a mercenary like before. Maybe joined it because, again, there is a very stigma against dwarfs because of their size. Guess what? They're shorter than your average human. And that leads to some issues that they have, both in society and the way they're treated. So, Dwarf Mercenary. Elven Decker again. We'll skip it for now. Former Company Man. We're going to probably go through a lot of these very quickly. Former Wage Mage. Hey, you know, it's still there. Gang members still here. Still the same. Mercenaries still the same. Riggers still the same. Shaman's back again. I think a new color palette on that one. Street Mage is still here. Street Samurai is still here. Street Shaman's still here. Tribesman's still here. We haven't gotten rid of the Tribesman. Well, that's our very short dive into 2nd edition. Again, not many major updates between these two here. For, the 1st and 2nd edition were very close to each other. And it takes until we get to this next one here, 3rd edition, where we're actually going to kind of start to see some larger changes in the way things are displayed. And honestly, this is when the rules' big update happens. They fixed a lot of the way the rules worked in 3rd edition. The modern version of, at least the 4th and 5th edition version of Shadowrun, the way the rules work, is very similar to the ways the rules worked in 3rd edition. 3rd to 4th to 5th are big enough changes that they could be considered different editions, especially because you can see that skills are taken very differently between 4th and 5th edition when we were talking about the basic concepts and stuff and the things about that previously. I've talked about kind of the adaptation between 4th and 5th, but it was here too in 3rd edition. This is where the system came out, and 6th edition has its own thing. So here we got the Adept. So the Adept's a little weird here, but the thing is, the Adept is the first time we're really showing it off here. The idea of an Adept is that you use your magic skill in your body. What does this mean? I'm a ninja, I'm a martial artist, I am a magic-based martial artist / ninja type person. Magic basically gives me internal abilities that I'm channeling out. I'm not throwing out spells. My magic gives me abilities inside. There are adept powers. Improve strength, improve unarmed combat, improve reflexes, killing hands, pain resistance. Those are the abilities. You basically use your magic stat to purchase abilities. So they give you ideas on playing an adept. This is a good one to introduce because this is the edition we were introduced to this new type of in a main book. I can't say for sure a extra book didn't introduce adepts in 1st or 2nd edition, but in 3rd edition, this is where, as part of character creation, they throw in the core book adept as an option. So now not only can I be a mage, I could be an adept instead with my magical skills. I can be like a martial artist that uses ki abilities kind of thing, or a ninja that uses like shadow abilities. It's thematically, it's whatever the hell you want it to be, but it's using magic with your body to do crazy shit. And there is our martial artist dude who's really honestly a little unusual looking here. But I don't know if this is culturally insensitive to anybody, but this is, at least we're in the 90s now. At least. There's a crack in this glass. I have to remember that. Anyway, so it's introducing a new, honestly, build that you can have. And this is a good point in time to show off the archetype, an archetype for that build. This is someone somebody could play. Combat Decker. Okay, we still have Deckers. They still use the thing. They're still using our good old friend, the keyboard. But as you can notice, hey, now your metatype built into the archetypes. So now you're not an orc combat decker, you're just a combat decker. This is someone that's a decker, but you're got some combat skills because you never know when you have to not be hacking and shoot the crap out of someone. So this is like the idea of, this is the ideal decker character for, honestly, 3rd edition and beyond. Well, you know, this is the idea of them because, hey, you hack into stuff, and sometimes you can't be hacking into stuff, you gotta get into a firefight, you gotta be ready for it, you gotta know some combat skills. So this is our evolution of the decker, which kind of marks how deckers kind of are a little bit more towards the future. They're not always going to be called a combat decker, but that's kind of what they are at this point in time. Combat mage, making a comeback, and a troll. This is, again, combat mage. You cast spells, you get into fights, you probably have some, like, weapons. It's like you got your spells. This guy's got a sword and a submachine gun, other than, you know, casting some spells. So, sure, you can cast Lightning Bolt or Mana Bolt, or, you know, get some improved react to speed up, but they're just as skilled as pulling out a sword to get in a sword fight for some melee, or pulling out a submachine gun for that time that they need to get into a fight like that. It's a traditional mage kind of build. This does lead towards Hermetic oftentimes because you're the, you know, blaster spellcaster type, not your shammaning spirit version type. Though, again, mages can summon spirits, shamans can cast spells. They're just each other better at the other one. You know, shamans and shamanic magic better at spirit summoning. Hermetic mages better at spellcasting. Covert Ops Specialist. Here is something not quite replacing, but going in the idea of the detective or the gang member. Here is someone that, honestly, trained in kind of stealth-based missions, stealth-based combat missions. This is a kind of training that pertains incredibly well to Shadowrunning. So, that's why I find it a little bit better than some of the earlier ones that kind of scream background. Now, where you got this kind of idea of your training could be actually from Covert Ops, but you could have been trained in that sort of kind of skills in different directions. It doesn't mean just I trained for a nation or a corporation in Covert Ops. You just have this kind of skills of being stealth, infiltration, and weapons, and some weapon skills. You probably have some cyberware too. This is the, you know, this is your rogue type character in a way. Your cyber rogue, maybe. And that's what a Covert Ops Specialist is. So, is it as good as some of the other archetypes? It's better, but it's kind of, again, under that level of, like, detective and stuff, which I like because it throws out an interesting selection of skills and a background. And I feel like this is, again, one that throws out an interesting selection of skills that matches what you kind of have an idea of what to take and a background. Drone Rigger. We have drones. 3rd edition introduced us to drones. And this is our Drone Rigger, who, guess what? They rig into drones and use them. So now, your rigger is no longer... Oh. Was there a reset? No, that was just my chat's connecting here and stuff like that. Is everything good on the stream? Sorry. I'm just checking something because it looks like there is a bit of a thing. There goes chat's connecting. Okay. I love little technical issues there, so sorry about the interruption. Anyway, Drone Rigger. We're Rigger. We can use drones now. Now, yeah, as a Rigger character, does this mean I'm not going to be sitting in the vehicle back and waiting for something to happen? And also be a glorified driver? Maybe. But also now I can send some drones in to help with the battle. Or I can go in and be like a commander of an army with a bunch of drones that I can use while I'm in there. There's a lot of different ways a drone rigger could go about things, but it means you're now a lot more hands-on as a rigger. You're not just the glorified wheelman. That's a good thing here. I'm going to tell you now, the idea of a drone rigger oftentimes combines with the vehicle rigger. They are technically, in quotations, still separate, but honestly, you're probably going to do kind of a little bit of both of them, because the drone rigger can then very easily transition to the wheelman. or we a woman to get them away. The face. Now, the face is a kind of evolution of the detective in a way, because the face, of course, is our negotiator. The face is our talk person. This is your character in another edition that might be skilled in diplomacy. You know, they have all the negotiation skills. They might have some combat skills, some cyberware, some things like that that make them still able to fight. But when it comes down to them, their strongest ability is to be able to go up to a Mr. Johnson or a fixer and basically negotiate a really great contract and also negotiate the best jobs for your group. A face is the charismatic one of your group. Are they a critical character? I'm going to say probably not. Is it great to have a face? Yes, because that means you got someone that's good on the talky word stuff. Because as much as Shadowrun oftentimes degenerates into fights, if I get into combat in Shadowrun, things have gone wrong. Best case scenario in Shadowrun, we use a lot of stealth, we break into a place, we do our thing, we get out undetected. Second best thing, we have a face. Someone that may be good at disguising, or talks our way out of a situation. Tricks someone with words, something like that. Combined with maybe like a decker or something, or something that can set up that gets that working. Lastly, Street Samurai cracks their knuckles and goes in for a fist fight. And that's the default if you're fighting your way out. I can adjust this a little bit for this one. This one needs a little bit of adjustment for the capture window here. There we go. But yeah, that's the face. The face is a good character to have. It's not a critical character to have, but being the charismatic talker one is an interesting direction and can be useful, and you can combine it with other skills too. You could be the covert ops specialist and the face if you want to split your points in the right way. Are you as highly specialized in one or the other? No, but again, archetypes you can mix and match if you have the points for it, or if you want to come up with something interesting. Like, think about this. The combat skill on this person here is a pistols of 2. Not a super big pistol. They don't have a huge skill. The investigator. Our detective is now the investigator. It's basically the same thing as the detective, but we've evolved, detective, evolve into investigator. Do, 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 the Pokemon music for evolution. As, do, 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 you're an investigator now. So it's a little bit more than just a detective. It's the idea that, like, you just have investigatory skills, you're good, able to look into stuff. Honestly, with the split between active skills and knowledge skills, you have a good selection of knowledge skills, which might help with your investigations. So you might be the knowledge person, rather than just the skill person in a way, which can be very helpful. If you have the correct selection or a good selection of knowledge skills, it means you can be rolling and knowing things without having to worry about deep diving into things like computer systems and stuff, but having also, if you look at the computer skills, the skill to deep dive into things and some intellect. Hey, the investigator is an interesting choice for a character archetype that you could choose from. The mercenary. The mercenary is still around. Again, we haven't evolved much for the mercenary, but this is like our kind of fighting type that uses probably a lot of different weapons. Unlike the Street Samurai, which mixes between melee and ranged, the mercenary is kind of like the Street Samurai, except you just use range, honestly. And maybe you don't have as much cyberware, because you spend a bunch of your money not on cyberware, but on freaking heavy weapons. You got like a rocket launcher, some grenades or something, or some high explosives. That's the mercenary. It's a little bit more gun-toting, explodey. And this is where you're kind of defining it a little bit more, where if you want to be the gun-toting, explodey more than the, get up in person, mix melee and gun work with maximum cyberware, that's kind of where it comes about. Sprawl Ganger. You're a gang member now. This is the gang member at this point in time. I can't answer right now. So, it's basically the evolution of the gang member. They're calling it Sprawl Ganger because, again, the sprawl is kind of like the slums areas that you can kind of find for a lot of cities. It's the same kind of idea. You're a gang member, you group on gang member stuff, you have etiquette and knowledge about the gangs, and it's just, again, evolution of the same kind of archetype we already had before, just to a new level. So we are having that kind of evolution of what we already had, which is good. Let me just check that my chat is correct right now, because it feels like there is an issue with the channel. Just making sure. Yeah, looks okay, good. Looks good. So, just making sure. But that's a Sprawl Ganger. A character that kind of is, again, evolution of the gang member we had before. We're evolving the characters and the archetypes in such a way, and still maintaining a lot of these good ones, I would say. Street Mage, kind of, again, in the lines of the Combat Mage, but as a street mage, this one here is a shaman. The reason I can kind of, well, actually both of them. It could be either shaman or things. This is the one that can kind of be either shaman or hermetic mage too. It's the idea that you are, got a little more street skills, maybe a little less combat, got some more knowledges, things like that. While a combat mage is probably going to take a lot of combat spells, here you're probably taking a little bit more utility or defensive spells. It's, again, kind of like being an invoker wizard in D&D or Pathfinder versus being a conjurer wizard sometimes, or being a transmuter or an illusionist. It's the same kind of thing between the combat mage and the street mage. They're just different archetypes of the same kind of thing, but they're kind of keeping them separate because it's an idea also of your background a lot of times too when it comes to these archetypes. Street Samurai makes their return, because of course they do. We can't have Shadowrun without a Street Samurai, and they're making their triumphant return as the Street Samurai. This one's using edged weapons, of course. They got a knife, got guns, call it a day, mix it with a bunch of cyberware. It's our tradition returns. Street Shaman. Now we're getting into like a little bit more of like shamans as actual shamans and stuff too, and like a little bit less direct, things. Our Street Shaman here, which is obviously a rat shaman, summoning rat spirits, because those are things. We're getting into our shamanic magic here, and our nice orc friend here, our rat Street Shaman here, who has a lot of rat friends, and, probably, summons rat spirits and stuff like that, and there you go. Our shamans have evolved into, like, an actual, like, archetype that makes sense. And again, you have to think that, like, there is a tradition of, like, shamanic magic being very, like, Native American tribal in general, and hermetic magic being very European magey, hermetic. And the two different ones have a lot of that in the way they go about and practice their magic and stuff, but at least we're getting a lot, like, simpler and things, You still have a little bit of style of that, but it's stylized. Tech Whiz. This is an interesting one because this is kind of not quite a decker, it's not quite a hacker. This is a techno expert. This is one that could be a decker or could be a rigger, but could be also their own thing, because it's like, about technology, you know how to work with technology. This is the person that, like, you go into a place and rather than hack into a pad, they use some tools, take it apart, and, like, kind of dissect it and stuff like that. They're the technical expert. They know electronics. They know, various things about it. They might be able to repair your equipment or tools and stuff. This character can be very useful. It feels like a minor type character, and it is a different kind of skill set, certainly, from a lot of other Shadowrun characters. Is it a critical one for your games? No, maybe not. I feel like there's an interesting idea, but, like, as for archetypes go, it's not a strong archetype, especially when it comes to a Shadowrun game. It can be a useful one. And there's one of the archetypes that might be able to do, kind of mix in with another archetype kind of thing. If you want to play just a straight Tech Whiz, though, on your own, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, and it probably would work really well, honestly. Every archetype, depending on how well you build it, works well. Even modern versions of these older ones, including this one. So, you know, if you want to play around with technology, and maybe you're not, like, throwing your brain into stuff, you could, but your entire idea is you're just, like, actually taking things apart and building them, that would be the Tech Whiz. Tribal Shaman, a Dwarven Tribal Shaman. So, again, this is a little different than we had our Street Shaman here, who lives in the cities. This is one that comes from, honestly, one of the tribal, probably one of the Native American nations. Again, the thing about this is very important to talk about, is Shadowrun kind of puts their entire worldview, most of the time, centering it on Seattle. Why? Seattle is technically part of the UCAS, but is surrounded on all sides by the Native American nations and such. It is a territory that was part of the Treaty of Denver that was kept separate to have a major port on the West Coast. The idea was not to put something into California, because California was having its own issues and was kind of rebelling at the time. So the next biggest port was, of course, Seattle, that they chose as a large port on the West Coast, because then they can fly planes over into Seattle, and if they need to ship things by boat, they can, and make it a little easy for kind of transportation and stuff like that. It was an idea of having a place on the West Coast. There's probably more reasons behind Seattle being a kind of neutral-ish slash UCAS city slash city-state in amongst the Native American nations. But that's why we get our tribal shaman here, this dwarf tribal shaman, who's probably, messing around with this crow spirit, raven spirit. And they're talking, raven, call a raven. Where, again, the idea is, because shamanic magic is more attached to the earth and natural things, is that shamans tend to like open spaces, natural world, and very simplistic worldviews. So basically, I've got to say, like, as you would imply them, hippies would make really good. The idealism of a hippie from the 60s and stuff, too, would make very good shamans, too. So maybe, this appearance here, where you're very natural and stuff, it's a little bit better than our older ones here, definitely. But it's the same kind of idea, that you're more connected with those Native American nations. Vehicle Rigger, it's back! It's our rigger friend, but it's the one that drives vehicles. It's just returning. We've split between drone and vehicle rigger now, in this book at least. Rigger kind of feels like rigger more in modern days, but we have the definite split here between them. You could still use vehicles, whether it's cars, planes, helicopters, boats, or whatever. You jack into them, connect in with them, control them with your mind, and, dive into them and be the vehicle. Weapon specialist. This is an oddball out, because we already have the mercenary, and the weapon specialist feels like the mercenary on steroids when it comes to weapons. The mercenary maybe is a little bit more like Street Samurai, except without the melee skills. Maybe we can call it that. This is taking a step farther and kind of dropping a lot of the cyberware, and instead just adding a billion weapon skills, and just being, I shoot things with all kinds of weapons. It's another kind of build in the same variation, and yes, you could call it something separate, but it's variations on the same kind of themes of shooty shooty bang bang, go kill one. So a lot of these feel very similar for good reason. They kinda are. They're variations on it. And again, it's not bad that these archetype variations exist. It gives you ideas on how you can variate on your own character and take up kind of these different builds. The more ideas for builds to have, the better it is, because, again, Shadowrun's a free-form system. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. Just getting an idea of whatever the hell that is good. Anyway, that's 3rd edition for you. So, now we are beginning to get into the more modern versions of things. We have still a number of books to go through. And we're probably going to do a lot more of these kind of skip-overs because, we get a lot of... we do get some difference here. And we're already at one that is technically different. Maybe I'll reload this entire thing here. We have the Bounty Hunter. And a Bounty Hunter is one that is interesting. The Bounty Hunter here, it's, again, taking that entire idea of the investigator, the detective, maybe going a little bit more street fighting. You still have some investigation skills, but it's the idea that, like, you know, you're tracking someone down. So this is a tracker, a modern-day tracker. You're going into cities, you're hunting things down, you're fighting people, stuff like that. That's the easiest way to describe it. We're not diving into something super different than what we had. We're kind of diving into something a little bit more developed. So, that is our good friend here. The bounty hunter. It's a lot of the same skill sets and ideas that we've had a lot of, but we're kind of taking it in a different direction for an idea that, you know, your bounty hunting skills go to Shadowrunning, being able to track or, you know, survive and stuff like that, especially survive in street situations. Combat Mage makes their triumphant return, of course. We're not going to be without a Combat Mage here in 4th edition. Everyone's favorite. Again, not much developed here. It's still a Combat Mage. We're not looking at something majorly different between the previous Combat Mages. It's an idea that you're mixing maybe a little bit of, like, combat skills that you have there, and also magic. Gunfights and magic together. 2 favorite flavors. Covert Ops Specialist continues because, again, the idea of the Covert Ops Specialist is to go a little bit more rogue. You know, it's your, you know, street rogue, or, you know, it's like the Street Samurais, you're like fighter, barbarian type, or fighter type. You know, the Covert Ops Specialist is maybe your rogue type. You know, mixing a lot of stealth skills and still some fighting group abilities. We continue with it. It's a pretty good, you know, idea for a build. Drone Rigger continues. We're still keeping the riggers separate. Again, drones are developing a little bit better. We're getting a lot more idealism for, like, combat spy drones, micro drones, and things like that have a lot more idealism. And so as the drones are developing and the concept of drones are developing into 4th edition, we get a lot more better ideas for what a drone rigger can do. Enforcer. So, Enforcer is kind of a little bit like our gang member before, but rather than an actual, like, gang member, it's probably a little bit more mafia-y, because there still are, like, mafias and stuff like that, and various types of things. You know, you got your tribes, Yakuza, your actual, like, you know, Italian mob, things like that. A lot of them do technically and an enforcer is kind of a strong arm for one of those many groups, or probably was one. Kind of maybe a middleman for a lot of negotiations. And so you have this idea, you know, it's got active skills, etiquette, mafia as a specialization. Yeah, you're an enforcer. You're kind of like, this is an evolution of the gang member, once again, to a different kind of direction. Organized crime rather than just normal crime. So, again, it's something different and interesting you can go about. Do you need something? I don't really, but...
are you busy around 5?
Maybe? I don't know. Probably not.
Because I've already been drinking, and that's the mark that you gotta get picked up from school. So she'll probably be home by then.
Okay.
Dad's gotta go to bed.
Okay.
So, alright.
Okay.
But I was also just waiting to talk to Dad.
Sorry about the interruption. Family stuff. Anyway. Little thing behind the wheel for Twitch side of stuff. So there's the Enforcer. It's a different evolution of the same concepts we've been having with the gangers of the kind of professional criminals, almost. The Face returns again, because, again, the Face is an interesting character and can be particularly useful to your games. The Face can be good. It's not something I can, like, bust at. Like, if I have a Face character, great. They're helpful. Gunslinger Adept. Here is a fun one that's a little bit different. Remember we had the Adept before, which was more martial artist. Hey, we're taking the Adept in a different direction. Now we are going basically gun fu, so it's sort of like those martial arts detective things where they're mixing like some physical martial arts and maybe like some gunfire and stuff like that, or like that entire idea of crazy gun fu kind of thing. And that's the thing, is this is a version of Adept that focuses on that, and it's a really cool idea that's evolving in Adept. So now, not only am I just thinking ninja or martial artists for Adepts, I'm thinking, oh, I can go into guns for Adepts. I can do like all these cool pistol tricks and use like, supervision to like, get super accuracy in this kind of thing. And it kind of builds into this entire idea of there are different versions of these things that we've had from before. And that's why Gunslinger Adept is a really cool one that they add in here. That adds a new layer to the Adept that we already had before, and a different direction to it. It gives you a different idea. You are the Gung Fu, into the Kung Fu, they say, as an actual quote in here. It's a cool idea. And I like that they kind of developed the Adept character and gave a different version of it that's very different and gives a very cool idea for a concept for a Shadowrun character. Hacker. Hey, during 4th edition, we went away from the Decker idea and added in the Hacker idea. This won't last. But for now, Deckers are hackers. It's the same thing, except now we have everybody's favorite, the cell phone. Remember, we had the second Matrix, the second crash. The Matrix crashed, and we Matrix 2.0. And now, instead of those big old keyboards, we got phones that are basically supercomputers in phones. So basically, those giant supercomputers that we have now, all in phone shape. We skipped a lot of years of smaller phones and stuff. I think there was actually like small phones and stuff that just weren't the same kind of thing. They just didn't combine them with computers like they did for the decks. So now we do. A weird like side evolution of like cell phones versus, computers, and how they kind of separated out and now they've come back together in a very good way. So you've got comlinks, which are basically supercomputers in your hand. Like, we have really powerful computers in our hands now. This is much more powerful. And the Hacker is the 4th edition version of it. Occult Investigator. Hey, we're taking another interesting idea. We're taking the mage version of it and combining it with our detective. We've got our Dresden, from Dresden Files, or Harry Dresden. We're another kind of interesting kind of like magic-based investigator. So we're combining our now investigator side with our magic side and coming up again with another really cool idea. That's what 4th edition's doing a little bit better here of. They're taking like, well, we have these two ones that were our old archetypes. Let's split them together and see what we get. Or let's take them in a different direction and see what we get. So this comes down to a different version of a mage who maybe has like a few attack spells, but has a lot of spells that help in their investigation. And you're probably going to have some like pistol skills and weapon skills then. You're like the magic detective. Radical Eco Shaman. So, here's where some more background stuff continues to happen. Guess what? Corporations still do shit stuff and still try to destroy the world. There's still a lot of pollution and terrible things going on in this version of the world. In the, I think by now is what, 2040s, 2050s? Maybe even, we're not quite the 2060s, I don't think, well, maybe 2065, 4th edition. I have to remember my time frame, which I just talked about a couple of weeks ago. But it's kind of hard to remember sometimes all the different editions. But this is an idea, is you're a shaman, whether if you're from the Native American nations or you just learn shamanic magic, but you're like, hey, we're all for nature first. What are all these corporations doing? You're becoming radicalized a little bit, and you're very anti-corporations. Maybe you take shadowrunning jobs that undermine corporations and help out local governments so they can have more power over corporations. You're one step away from being an eco-terrorist. That's what an eco-shaman is. There's just one bad thing that could happen that could drive you over that line, but you're still not quite there. You're not quite at that point in time. You haven't been that radicalized, but you're still very, like, man, we got to do something about this. But you're not like, we're going to blow stuff up large scale. Fortunately. But this is an interesting character kind of concept to take, because it's sort of like you're in a position where you want to do some great things, and certainly you have a lot of power to, but that power could kind of corrupt you. And so I think that's why the idea of a radical eco-shaman is kind of outdated now, because this is kind of that one step away from a eco-terrorist. And, you know, we're talking, you know, 90s, late 90s, I think, for 4th edition. I could probably look that up to, like, get the actual dates of these things. Here. See, like, the Shadowrun editions came out. 4th edition came out in 2005. I guess kind of the idea of eco-terrorism was always been bad, but it's the idea that it's kind of in the here. I would think that they would have kind of walked away from this, but I guess it's the idea that you're not quite over that line. Yeah, I think it's that you're not quite over that line there. That you're in a situation where you're trying to not become that extreme, while you still have beliefs that can drive you to some very dangerous things. And I think that's the idea of the radical eco-shaman, is you're walking a fine line. You are not a terrorist, but you might be close to some people that could have gone that far, unfortunately. It's kind of one of those things that I'm sure there are plenty of people in various cultures that have, where terrorist organizations have formed out of those cultures, you know, whether ecological based or basically your belief system based. You have to deal with those people, and you might know them, and you might not agree with them, and, you know, you might agree to a degree with them, but as far as they go, they've taken it too far, and that kind of puts you in a difficult situation. So it comes with an interesting ideal, but again, it's this weird idea that if you want to take it for a shaman, you could just be a shaman too. Smuggler! Hey! Now, this is an interesting idea, because this is, it's developing some of the ideas we've had before. We're taking the idea of someone that's good at traveling between. This is like your vehicle skill person. This is one that's really good at the vehicles they can do, and they are like, this is like your getaway driver combined with someone that's good for, honestly, smuggling things and being like, breaking between countries and stuff, too. Maybe, again, they got a little bit of hacking and stuff, and things like that make them an interesting idea. So this kind of comes, again, by a background, but it also comes up with a set of skills that aren't a terrible set of skills to add into a Shadowrunning group. And that's another reason why it's a very interesting one. This is your vehicle skill person, who's going to be like your expert driver. And that comes up with some interesting ideas for a character build. I think that's why Smuggler is an interesting one, and I feel like that's, again, by the time we're getting to 4th edition, we are coming up with these background, kind of more concept archetypes, but the background concept archetypes are also marred with very interesting skill selections and a direction which makes them more interesting and less generic for a character. This is like when I'm talking the difference between the former corporate person versus a detective. The former corporate person, what did you do for the corporation? Were you a fighter? Were you something else? You could have been anything. You could have just been a wage slave that got out of the job and learned some combat skills. It's very generic. Detective at least screams what skills it's a. Smuggler screams what skills you're going to have. Vehicle-based skills, honestly, a lot of times. So, while we had our Enforcer, who's Mafia, which is kind of an evolution of the Sprawlganger, we still have the Sprawlganger, of course. One of them is going to have a little bit more like, actual etiquette and be like a little bit more talky, charismatic. The Sprawlganger is going to be kind of the same kind of thing, criminal. It's a gang member. You know, you've got that gang thing. It remains the same as it's ever been. Street Samurai returns in all of its glory, because of course it does. It's honestly a traditional one at this point in time. The man and machine mix, along with some weapons of various kind, from swords to pistols and other guns. The Street Samurai is honestly the up-close and personal fighter, while a mercenary type is probably still like going to want to get gunfire from afar, use some military tactics. Street Samurai is the get up and personal, maybe shoot you in the gut or stab you. Street Shaman makes our triumphant return as, honestly, the shamans that live in the streets. You know, whether you're a rat shaman or something, you got some magic, you went the shamanic ways because maybe you had a call from spirits and stuff like that. So, Street Shaman makes his triumphant return. Technomancer is introduced in 4th edition. Guess what the second crash did? Make people that can organically enter into the Matrix. Here's our first introduction to the Technomancer. We've talked about them in character creation. Basically, your brain can, whatever reason, connect up with machines. You can dive your consciousness into computers without technology. You've got a resonance score. You don't want to drop your essence. You're probably not going to use any cyberware. And honestly, you're going to basically mind hack things. Technomancer. We're introduced to them. Welcome, Technomancer. Nice to see you. Weapon Specialist makes their triumphant return as the basically gun person. Less cyberware, more just guns and weapons and stuff. At this point in time, we've kind of taken a step back from kind of mercenaries. We're kind of specializing in Street Samurai for the cybered out one, weapon person, weapon specialist for this, the skill-based, I got a lot of weapons, I've got the right weapon for the right job. Almost like the universal tool, or like the, the Swiss Army knife of weapons. So weapon specialist, triumphant return. And there is our 4th edition ones. We got 3 more books to go through here, so let's dive into, of course, the next one, which is 5th edition. So, 5th edition is not alphabetically ordered, because of course they aren't, because they hate me in this one. So we start with Street Samurai. Yep. Street Samurai as it is. We continue to keep with it. We maintain very similarities. We have a pretty good character sheet built down here. As you can see, as the editions go on, more of the character sheet is shown. This is a good part about it because it gives the more of the sample character is actually shown off, and this is a very good example character, giving you an idea of everything you would have as this Street Samurai. Covert Ops Specialist continues, our rogue type character. We always get a good return to them. Occult Investigator. Hey, it was a cool idea. Let's stick with it. We get our mages, which also are our detectives now combined. A Private Eye that also can cast a little bit of magic. Maybe summon a spirit to help you out. Cast a spell that might make you be able to see things. The Street Shaman makes a triumphant return. Because, of course, again, we've got shamanic magic and hermetic magic. But shaman magic that deals with spirits, there are spirits in the cities. And, honestly, it's still a lot like today. As much as the land is nice and stuff, a lot of times the call of the city can be helpful for a lot of things. Especially, a lot of shit has happened. There might be a lot of reasons to be in a city. So, there are people to help here. And as they kind of describe here is, hey, there are terrible things happening in the sprawls, in the slums of big cities. Someone that might be able to communicate with spirits or cast some healing magic might be really helpful to help out some people that can't afford things. And so maybe that's why this shaman went there. Live on the streets. Be like a street doc, but with magic. Combat Mage continues their triumphant return to shoot some stuff and blast it with spells. It's become a tradition at this point in time that we're going to keep with it. Gun and spell hand in hand. Brawling Adept. Well, now we're adapting our Adept once more. We had Gunslinger Adept, we had Generic Adept. Now we got just the Adept that's big in for a street fight. Are you into a martial artist? Martial arts? Hell no. You're in for just fisticuffs. Or just, enhancing your strength and hitting it. You are the down and dirty Adept that's ready to just kick some ass and take some names, and it's going to be all-out street brawl. We're degenerating into something that's a little less, organized and a little bit more, you got the magic of this Adept in your body, you just learn to fight. This is the ultimate example of what an Adept can be. Because an Adept doesn't need discipline like a martial artist or like the ninja, which I first talked about. Sure, those early versions of Adept really kind of leaned into that's what you kind of were. But this tells you you can just be an Adept, that you got these powers, that you were born with them, that you kind of awakened them. And maybe you didn't get into a martial arts. Maybe you just got into some street fights. And it gives you an idea that as an adept character, you can go in a lot of different directions. So this is a fun one to kind of have, the brawling adept. Weapon specialists. Again, a triumphant return. We're not really looking at a lot of new things in this one. You got a lot of weapons, you got a lot of weapon skills, and you're going to basically jack of all trades when it comes to weapons. Does this call for a rifle? Does this call for a pistol? Does this call for a shotgun? Does this call for a machine gun? Does this call for a rocket launcher? I don't know, but I'm going to be ready for it. Does this call for high explosives? Possibly in there. That's our good old weapon specialist ready for it. The face. Triumphant return, because again, there's always a time and a place for a face, and you might need it. You might need to kind of get, a few extra bucks out of your Mr. Johnson, convince someone to let you pass, trick a middle manager, or convince a middle manager while on like a date that they go on with them to give you a couple of bits of information that could help with your break into their business. There's a lot of different things a face can do, and they're probably help out when it comes to being there in the actual break-in, but a lot of the setup related things, great for it. Because again, half of a Shadowrun is the setup. Getting everything ready to make it as smooth as possible to break in there and get your job done. And the face is really great at greasing those wheels. The tank. So, this is an interesting one because this is like kind of Street Samurai, but not necessarily Street Samurai. This is like our evolution of the mercenary, I'd kind of say. This is your, like, honestly, I got a joke about it, but this is your big character who's probably really strong, whether you're a troll or something else, that, you could just be a human and be a tank, but you are basically while the Street Samurai is getting up close and personal fighting, this is you're probably going to attract a lot of weapons fire and stuff. You are the person you're going to want people to shoot at you, and you're going to want to take the shots, and then honestly, fight back. Kind of like the MMO tank character, I would kind of compare it to. You're the one that's attracting the things, and you're the big, strong person. Probably got some weapon skills, but you are certainly the brawler kind of thing. This one, honestly, only has pistols and unarmed combat, which makes sense, because you are armored out, cybered out in such a way that you are ready for a big old fight. The tank character. An interesting direction to take characters, and not a bad direction. I feel like there's a lot of other previous archetypes that have kind of hit on this, and just specializing it this much might be a little bit much. I don't know. That's a question I've got on this one. This one feels a little specialized more than I would normally take. Decker! We're no longer hackers. We're back to being deckers in 5e. Woo! It's the same thing it's ever been. Digital world, 6th world. You're messing around in the Matrix, hacking in. This one's got a little bit of augmented reality, because in 3rd edition we introduced augmented reality, that you can have stuff overlaid over your face and stuff, whether it's goggles or in your eyes, that you can see what's going on. Technomancer, of course, still there next to your Decker friend, because one is the one that uses technology, the one that uses no technology. Of course, we're going to have them next to each other. Gunslinger Adept makes its triumphant return, because, of course, as I said, it was a pretty cool one. It was a great idea for an adept, and honestly speaking, kind of splitting between your ranged adept and physical melee adept is really cool, kind of adding a different flair to both different types of adepts and kind of directions you can take with it. Drone Rigger, of course. They got some fly drones they're sending out there, some real micro drones, like minuscule fly drones that are have like super cameras on it. Those big drones that we have that are $1 million the military has that have great cameras on them? Think about having that level of cameras on a drone the size of a fly. That's the technology that's in this world right now. And that's why we have drone riggers who can send them out like that and have that control. A really cool idea, and the ideas and imagination behind the drones have developed a lot. Smuggler makes a triumphant return because, again, you're the vehicle foo person, master of vehicles, have some cool ride, and use them for some really cool stuff. And this one has a couple of different vehicles, and it's getting people from one place to another with avoiding detection. Sprawl Ganger, Triumphant Return, our gang member, continues to be a staple in archetypes that we see. Bounty Hunter makes Triumphant Return also, as it's got some of that mixture of skills that can be useful, and kind of an idea of a survivalist tracker is pretty fun. And then we are done with 5th edition. 2 more books to go about. Hey, it transitioned when I just X'd it out. That's kind of cool. So, we have the 20th anniversary book, which was a kind of... this one I would call a kind of slight update that we had. We had the 20th anniversary in between 4th and 5th edition. So I should have actually had this one first before the 5th edition, but I opened them in different order. So it was 89, the first edition, 92 for second edition, third edition was 98, 2005, this is 2009, 2013 was 5th edition, and 6th edition comes out in 2019. Anyway, this 5th edition, I should have done it in between there, made a mistake, I just put it out of order, I didn't realize till we got to it. We've got, it's our 4.5, we got Bounty Hunter, making a triumphant return, Combat Mage, making their return, Covert Ops Specialist, a little kind of cool looking there with like super futuristic stealth suits. Drone Rigger, looking a little happy there about sending out his drones, and the big old humanoid battle droid behind him. Enforcer, which we just talked about, you know, which is kind of our mob enforcer kind of character. The Face, I like this guy here, this dwarven face. He's got the card. A lot of times they show off things like humans and elves, but I find it fun when they do this kind of thing where they're like, hey, other metatypes can be faces too. Here's a dwarven one. So like, you know, kind of snappy, kind of looks really cool there. I like him. Our Gunslinger Adept, the same art for before. Our Hacker still, because we're still technically 4th edition on this one. Ooh, we walked away from that. Occult Investigator, of course, makes its triumphant return in its 20th anniversary. Radical Eco Shaman still there. We took a step back from that when it came to 5th edition. Smuggler is still there. Yeah, I guess it's the idea that Decker was more traditional of a word for it. They switched to Hacker because it's something that I think when we went to 4th edition, they went to it because they wanted it to be a little bit more universal so you understood what you were. But then they're like, well, we already have this pre-established language. We'll just go back to Decker because though you're not using the decks anymore, which from 1st to 3rd edition they were, you are the new generation of people that used to use that. So it's sort of like, yeah, you're modern day hacker and you have technology that's not a deck anymore, but, you know, your grandfather's hacker would have used decks. So you're kind of living up to their words, sort of. Sprawl Ganger, Street Samurai, and Street Shaman, and Technomancer, and Weapon Specialists, and there we go. There is 20th anniversary. I'm going to X up. So, we have one more book to look at, and that is, of course, our fun friend, the 6th edition book, which is our finale for archetypes here. We've gone through these archetypes. We've pretty much gone over all the archetypes and talked about them over the last hour and a half, so you have an idea of what there is. So, here we go. Adept. Yep. They talk about it here. They mentioned cyber zombies here, which is really cool in the Adepts little thing here, because that's something that isn't talked about a lot. Cyber zombie is when you have an essence of 0 or below. It requires a lot of stuff to keep you alive after that point, because most of the time when your essence reaches 0, you die. Cyber zombies are those people that use a combination of magic and technology to stay alive, and oftentimes it's very expensive. It might be cheaper now in 6th edition world, certainly, but normally when you're a cyber zombie, you work for someone, or you're paying off them. You know, you're in debt to someone, usually a corporation that's built you into super cybernetic monstrosity, which you use to just murder the shit out of people. But we have a Return of the Adept. Keep it pretty simple here. Just the fighter type Adept. No kind of specialization here. You're just an Adept. It's just an idea. We're kind of almost railroading back to 3rd edition version of it, but they're keeping it a little generic. Remember, we're in 6th edition now. Remember what 6th edition did? 6th edition simplified everything. 6th edition went a little bit more generic. So we're going to probably take a step back from some of the specialization in our archetypes to something a little bit more generic. And I'm sorry, we're taking a step back, I feel like. But, again, we still have our adept here. We're still going to have some cool things. And things worth talking about. Combat Mage. It's honestly a very easy one to scream out there. You're a mage, you get into fights, use weapon skills if you need to, or magic if you need to. It's a very simple build that's very easy to understand. Covert Ops Specialist, our rogue type, always cool to throw out there. You know, it's what we're looking for. It's again, it's one of the core tenets of a lot of these groups. It's like, I can say this one's a pretty core build. You know, a lot of these other side builds are really cool archetypes, or they add stuff to various archetypes, give you ideas about things. But there are core builds you kind of aim towards. The Decker, of course, are good old friends who use the hack the planet quite literally and go dive into the Matrix. The Face. Hey, our charismatic, talk it out kind of things. The closest thing to this team has to a bard. That's what it is. It's like your kind of bard, talky person. That's your face, and it's always useful. And here's an orc face, which I kind of like too. Again, adding different meta types. I like it when they do that because it gives an idea that there's more than just humans and elves. Who honestly, elves get a bonus to charisma, so I mean that's why they use them a lot. But Riggers. Riggers are now combined into one. Whether or not whether you're using vehicles or drones or stuff. You know, riggers, they dive into the road and stuff like that. I think they're keeping them pretty simple, you know, that you're using one or the other. You're using kind of both, maybe, too. You know, drones, vehicles, there you go, you're a rigger. They combine them into one rather than keep them separate. Which, honestly, I'm actually kind of okay with, because I've got to be honest. Most of the rigger characters I know about combined both of them, too. It's really hard to specialize into one or the other. And not have times where you're not useful. If you're a vehicle rigger, you're, again, glorified getaway driver a lot of times, and your vehicle can be very useful and have a lot of things, but it limits your use in a lot of missions too. While on the other hand, drone rigger can be great too, but honestly, you usually need someone to drive, and, you know, freaking can be helpful, so why not both? Street Samurai. It is what it's always been. You're a Street Samurai. Call it a day. You use a little bit of melee skill, a little bit of gun skill, a lot of cyberware. Get in there. You're just one step away from a cyber zombie. Kick some ass. Street Samurai exist. And the thing is, like, yeah, there are tenets that they talk about here to the Street Samurai. I was talking about that. That, you know, to being righteous, heroic, courage, compassionate, respect, honesty, honor, valor, self-control. These are, like, Street Samurai. If you are a Street Samurai, you're living up to, like, a version of the Samurai Code and stuff like that. You know, it's like, you know, it's an idealism that I really like how, like, they're attempting to be modern-day samurai in the world, to a degree, but mixing those kind of things. And I like that they're defining it a lot better than they do in a lot of places here for Street Samurai. 6th edition, you did something really well here. The way you define archetypes, you keep them simple, but you define the archetypes well. Street Shaman, of course. Yeah, you're kind of like that knight samurai type character, but on the streets, and you know that you've got to, like, you use violence when it's necessary, you do things when it's necessary, but only when it's necessary. You'd rather not get into a fight. The Street Samurai's there in case you need to get into a fight when you're talking about a Shadowrun. If you're not getting into a fight, you're hoping that you don't need to. The Street Samurai is always hoping they don't need to do anything. That's the thing about a Street Samurai. They're ready for the fight, but also they're prepared not to fight. Street Shaman, of course, you're using shamanic magic, summoning stuff. I'm going to tell you here, this art here is just a little bit bad because insect spirits are horrible and, you know, they are a plague upon the world there. So someone didn't get the message on insect spirits because I'm just sorry. They kind of infect things and spread and are kind of a plague. And cause problems because they, like, soul-possess people and corrupt them and do horrible things. So, insect spirits, bad! Unless you're actually summoning insects, which that still might deal with insect spirits. So, I don't know. Art not good here. Technomancer. Hey, Technomancer! Make their triumphant return. Weapon Specialist. Make their triumphant return. Again, jack of all trades when it comes to weapons is a great idea, and they develop it more. And there are your 6th edition archetypes. So, I hope now that we've kind of walked through this entire thing here and talked about all these different archetypes and given you an idea on the different types of characters you can play in Shadowrun. Yes, some of those 1st edition archetypes and 2nd edition archetypes have some 90s, 80s problematicness to them, / they're outdated, / they're too simplistic. They're a background rather than things. But you can see how the ideas of these archetypes help develop a lot of ones over the years. All of these archetypes add to the idea of different things you can do, and it gives you suggestions on directions you can take your character. If you want to be a street samurai, cool. How will you build your street samurai? However you want. You could axes and shotguns with a bunch of cyberware while you try to keep under that thing. You can use pistols. You can use rifles. You could use swords. You could use knights. You could use unarmed. You could use cyber attacks. Yeah, your past is how you learn. These things still give us ideas on characters. The, directions that they took with someone when you're the former corporate person, or you're, honestly, their tribesman person where, we're stationed out of Seattle. Again, Native American nations here, where there's been a resurgence in Native American culture and old culture because of the magic connections, the shamanic magic connections to it. So, yes, the tribesman is outdated. The concept behind it maybe isn't. That you're someone in the last 30 years or so. Because again, 2030s, when a lot of the shit happened, early 2000s, before we did, again, alternate world history, shit went down, world changed, Native American nations got their own countries. It's been a while. You could have been raised in that world. In a world where there's a resurgence of it. Maybe your parents were shamans who embraced a lot of that old ways. And so you have this very tribal mentality because of the new world order as it is in your nation. And you travel to the big city of Seattle. It's a background. It's a story of your life. It's not really an archetype. Because you could do anything. Because as much as, there is this resurgence of the past, it doesn't mean there's not cities and technology and stuff like that. Sure, it's like small town America. Small town Native American nation is probably still small town. Probably not missing a lot of stuff. But there are big cities still out there. There's still technology. They didn't get rid of technology. They didn't. None of them did. They just wanted their own lands and culture to be like their thing again. And they got that. So there is this background for it. And a lot of the other ones, they function better as a background. I was in with a corporation. Maybe I was a corpo citizen. Because guess what? Some corporations have their own citizenship. I know. It's crazy, some of the stuff that happens in here. It's a dystopian world where a lot of crazy crap and magic has come back. So it opens up your mind to a lot of past backstories and stuff, and ideas of where your character could come from. Or you could have grown up in the streets of Seattle, and one of those street-based kind of characters could be you, sprawl ganger. Maybe you got yourself into the mafia and become an enforcer, and now you kind of left the mafia or something, still have connections to it, but you've kind of broken out on your own. The thing is, you could have it that you've set up for enemies, that, you chose to leave it and you didn't do it on good terms, or maybe went on good terms. There's a lot of directions you can take for backstories that can lead into, negative qualities. Oh, I've got some enemies, or positive qualities and stuff like that, or contacts and stuff. It's sort of like, some things happened. You left the mafia. You're in this mafia that you were a member of. You left the family, but you left on relatively good terms and have some connections with them still. You know, it's not an easy life to leave, but things can happen that could cause it to leave. It's an idea that there are this selection of directions you can take your character. Whether you're a decker, whether you're a rigger, whether you're an adept, whether you're a magician, hermetic or shamanic, whether you are just a dude where you specialize in skills, where you're weapons expert or covert ops specialist or the face. Those are all skill experts who use a combination of attributes and skills. Whether you're a street samurai spending $1 billion of your dollars cyberwaring yourself out, whether you're good old mercenary from before, which kind of takes a step away that you probably don't have a lot of qualms about things, where you're just the gun person, maybe more of a barbarian, honestly, that you're the barbarian rather than the fighter, you know, the fighter/knight. A lot of different directions you can kind of take the idea. And so many of these archetypes can just give you thoughts on where to go with. And understanding where they came from and the stories behind them is important too. Because as we said, there is some problematic ways that they look upon things from the early 90s and early editions as we open those books and stuff like that. But we can be historians and take a look at those and still learn from them and understand why they did them. Very important. So, I think that's a great place to learn it. Again, what interests you in all these archetypes out there? What's kind of the ones that kind of like threw out there of like, oh, I've played that one before, that's my favorite to play, or man, that'd be a fun one to play. That'd be like I'd like to see people talk about, you know, especially in comments when this goes up on YouTube. Or if you want to, throw over my Discord, and like in the Shadowrun section of my Discord, you can talk about that. Because guess what I have in tabletop discussions? I have other RPGs. I should make a Shadowrun one, because I'm a very big favorite of Shadowrun. I really should. Other RPGs. Maybe I'll make that one today. I'll make a Shadowrun one and say, hey, you can check it out there and say some things there. Anyway, I'm going to go. We'll talk more about Shadowrun in the future. There's plenty more still to talk about. I can honestly do something like I could talk about the unusual metatypes, or maybe we'll have a big discussion on Seattle. Because it is the main city. It is the city that every edition kind of centers themselves out of. And the one that we know the most about of all the cities in the Shadowrun world, because it's visited so much. It's the big city in this world. So, anyway. Again, thank you all for joining me live. Anybody that's watching this on YouTube. Anybody that's joining me live on Twitch. Those that commented, Worm, thank you for joining. And then, of course, I'm going to get going. Tuesdays, Thursdays, tabletop days. Make sure to check them out. This will go up on YouTube eventually. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And I'll see you all the next time. Farewell. Check out my schedules on both YouTube, Twitter, and Discord and stuff for all those different things. Farewell, everybody. Bye. Bye. Links in the description for just support and stuff.